Japan Station is made possible in part by Patreon support. If you would like to make sure that I can keep bringing you more content like this, then head on over to japankyo.com/Patreon and sign up for as little as $1 a month. Welcome to Japan Station, a production of japankyo.com. I'm your host, Tony Vega. I'm just going to dive right into it because I've got a jam-packed conversation for you today with music journalist Patrick St. Michel. So if you've ever read an article about Japanese pop music in, let's say, the Japan Times or Pitchfork, you've almost certainly read an article by Patrick. He's been doing this for quite a while. He also was running a blog called Make Believe Melodies about Japanese pop music. That has turned into an email newsletter, which he is sending out weekly, I believe. You can find that at mbmelodies.substack.com. Link in the show notes. Again, go check that out. Tons of great information there. Today, we are going to be talking about a few things. So we start the conversation talking about his journey into J-pop. Then we go into J-pop versus K-pop. Ooh, controversial, I know. And then we go into city pop, which exploded in popularity in, I guess it was around 2018, the time he interviewed Maria Takeuchi. And then we get into Eurobeat. So I've been wanting to talk to Patrick for a while. I was waiting for the right opportunity, and then he published an article in the Japan Times about Super Eurobeat / Eurobeat, whatever you want to call it. It's a fascinating topic that I absolutely love, so I couldn't help but reach out and say, Patrick, can you talk about Eurobeat with me? Thankfully, he came on and we had a blast. And please don't tune out once we get to the Eurobeat. I know a lot of people probably don't care about Eurobeat, but there's a lot of interesting cultural, historical stuff going on there, a lot of online meme culture. We talk about all that kind of stuff. So it's not just us talking about, I don't know, Initial D or something like that. So stay tuned for that. And then after that part in the conversation at the end, Patrick is going to give us some awesome recommendations for new Japanese artists and songs and albums that he likes. So stick around. You're going to get some good info at the end, even if you're not too crazy about Eurobeat, which I absolutely am. So... But again, check out his newsletter, mbmelodies.substack.com, and let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Patrick St. Michel.
The next stop is Japan Station. The doors on the right side will open.
So, I know a lot of people, well, they know you for what you write on, kind of pop culture in general, but I think a lot of people know you specifically for music stuff in Japan and Japanese music. So I'm curious, what was your gateway into Japanese music specifically? Was there a certain artist, a genre, or like something that happened? Was there an event that said like, oh, I really like this, and then it forced you to kind of go deeper and deeper?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess in like high school and college, when I was living in, I grew up in California, and then I went to university in Chicago. So kind of just always in America. Mm-hmm. And my experience with Japanese music then was very, very limited. Mm-hmm. Just kind of like, it was things that websites like Pitchfork or there was a site called Tiny Mixtapes. They would do like little articles about Japanese rock bands, mm-hmm. but kind of like underground stuff like Boredom's Shugo Tokumaru. Mm-hmm. So you could like kind of safely say the Pitchfork lane of Japanese music I had a little familiarity with, mm-hmm. But not a ton. And then after college, I went to, due to sort of like I don't know how much you want to get into this, sort of, a career crisis / existential dread that I imagine most people face as graduation looms. Yep. I decided to spend a year teaching English in Japan on the JET program.
Yeah.
And they were just like, all right, you're going to go to Mie Prefecture. Do you know what that is? No, that's okay. You're going to go there. And yeah, I went to Mie. It's very like, it's between Nagoya and Osaka for people who don't have the geography of Mie Prefecture down. And a little suburban would be the nicest way to put it. Very bed town. And, I had always been interested in music. I had written about music in college just for fun. And one day, sort of like within maybe the first 2 weeks of moving to the town I would be based in, I went to an electronics store, a K's Denki.
Oh, K's Denki. I know K's Denki.
Have you been to a K's Denki? Yeah.
Yeah. Of course.
Of course. So I go there because there's not much entertainment in the city. And like, I'm still so new that sort of like an electronics box store is really thrilling to me. So I go there, and in store, they're playing, this really catchy sort of electronic pop music that I'd never heard before. So I'm totally unfamiliar with, and it's really sort of like overwhelming me, I guess. Like, wow, this sounds incredible. I've never heard anything like this.
Mm-hmm.
What is this? After eventually figuring it out, I find out it's a group called Perfume, a J-pop group.
Oh,
that
okay.
At this point in 2009 had just put out a new album. So I kind of arrived in Japan as this album cycle was kind of crescendoing. And that was my gateway. Like, that music kind of blew my mind. It showed me that, there's so much more to music in Japan than sort of what I've been presented via English language media to this point. And it was just kind of like a wake up call is maybe a little dramatic, but it was kind of just like, wow, there's this whole it's the true idea of oh wow, everything, there's a whole world out there. Isn't that crazy? And that, coupled with the fact, I was living somewhere without much to do, it was kind of just okay, cool. I'm going to spend my free time after work trying to learn more about Japanese music and try and just via blog, share it with people who might be interested. And that really is kind of where it all starts for me. I mean, it's all Perfume. That's 100% honestly why I still live in Japan all these years later.
Yeah. I mean, I was in Japan. The first extended stay that I had was from 2007 to 2008. And then I was in Kobe from 2010 to 2013. So I was there throughout that whole big first few years of Perfume. And yeah, they were all over the place.
Nice.
I remember going to the one of these purikura, one of those photo booths, and the song that was playing on infinite loop was chocolate disco, chocolate disco.
A dream. I would never leave that photo booth. That's just post up now.
Yeah. But and then that, of course, got me into Nagata Yasutaka, right? The producer. And all the stuff that he does, Capsule, and of course, Carry Pamyu Pamyu, and all this just really catchy, really awesome stuff that he's done. So I think Perfume was a incredible gateway for many people.
Yeah, I feel that is true. I mean, yeah, you meet a ton of people, even just in my personal experience, who's that's kind of the only J-pop they know, which is if you're going to choose one group, I respect that. But yeah, they're definitely and especially over the past 10 years, I feel they've gained a lot of sort of greater attention, which has been great to see. And yeah, I'm like all those people. That's 100%. I hear that playing in the appliance section of K's Denki, and I'm like, what? I guess I'll change my entire life for this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's something to be, I think, you can't overlook that, because there's there's nothing wrong innately with the music that, for example, the standard idol groups put out. Let's just say the AKBs and blah blah blah, all those. It's a very identifiable style. Many songs kind of follow. You can tell it's one of these big idol groups when you hear it. But when you hear a Perfume song, you can tell it's a Perfume song. It's a Nagata Yasutaka song. And there's something, I think, that has resonated with that style with a wider audience perhaps than a lot of the more traditional idol stuff. And I don't know, would you agree with that? What do you think
Oh,
about
definitely.
that?
I think especially on I guess you can look at it multiple ways. I mean, I think in Japan, it's partially the fact they were doing something when they sort of broke out that was like totally fresh in the J-pop industry. You know, that's coming after like the last big idol boom was Morning Musume in the late 90s, early 2000s. And that has a very like identifiable, cheery dance pop sound,
Right.
but it's not very like quote unquote futuristic, which is how Perfume kind of introduced themselves to listeners. I just think that sound and sort of their image, especially them, like, despite being very idly in construction as a group, not embracing the idol tag. Like, I think that really resonated with people, and that sound really just stood out. And then in terms of like the rest of the world, I think it is partially, yeah, they have a very unique sound. Yes, Taka Nakata has developed a very, like, his musical language, his musical textures are very, very much his. You can identify him, like, whether it's through his original work or like a remix of Kylie Minogue or something. And I think that helps a lot. But it also helps that I think a lot of that sound just became way more mainstream sort of globally in the 2010s. I think like there's a lot of Nakata in the DNA of like EDM from that period. Like I know artists like Skrillex and Zed and like Porter Robinson is especially a real, like, he's infatuated with Nakata's production. PC Music, that is sort of a step down, like in terms of overall visibility, but still quite well known. Like all of them are kind of fans of Nakata's style. And I think that just became more and more mainstream. And as people sort of would be like, oh, hey, I wonder what Sophie listened to, or I wonder what Porter Robinson is into, they eventually come around to the capsules and perfumes of Japan. And it's like, oh, cool. This is like right up my alley.
Yeah. Like, I mean, maybe this is kind of reaching a bit, but something that I think a lot of people that are interested in Asian pop culture in general, eventually at one point, even if they don't vocalize it, they can't help but kind of compare a little bit in their minds, is K-pop versus J-pop. And you've seen K-pop reach this kind of explosion point where it's I think gotten more widespread interest from the West than the kind of classic J-pop stuff has. But that being said, like I said, I think
that's a safe statement.
Okay, thank you. I'm very careful about some of these fans can be very passionate, but that's the impression that I've gotten. So something that I couldn't help but think about is like, why is this? And my conclusion is that K-pop has been perfectly fine with integrating kind of these more Western styles of pop music and making themselves sound a bit in I guess in a way Western, whereas J-pop, the classical sort of things have been more intent on just doing kind of, this is what idols sound like, and we're going to keep doing that style. And if you like it, you'll come to us. If you don't, well, it's for Japan, so too bad. Like maybe that's not the explicit thinking, but that's the vibe that I've gotten. What do you think?
I think it definitely ties to that. To me, it's more with K-pop in particular. I think what K-pop does very well, and it's a kind of a result of both how the industry works, the size of the domestic market, kind of forcing companies to look outward, and just kind of maybe the sort of musical inspirations and interests that Korean companies have. I think K-pop's really good at knowing how to capture the moment in pop music. Like if you listen to, I'm trying to think of a good recent example. Like, I mean, BTS is kind of like, that seems too easy, but,
but
like, I mean, all of K-pop sounds very, it's in line with what you hear. So like, BTS has lots of elements of rap, which is obviously massive in the United States and other parts of the Western world as we envision it. Or like you have Blackpink, which utilizes these sort of more hard-hitting EDM elements as well. So K-pop is really good about being in tune with Western sonic trends. And honestly, beyond just Western sonic trends, it's very good at sort of just global pop, big quotes around that one, trends. But I think with J-pop is always out of step with the world, owing to kind of how the Japanese market is always able to sustain itself. You know, like hardcore fans are going to just kind of go to the groups anyway. And AKB48, like 10 years ago, didn't have to push themselves to be global. It's like, why do that when we can just make all the money here? Like, it's too easy. And when you listen to Japanese music, and I kind of think it's true throughout at least the period I've been living and covering Japanese music, I think at its best, it is always kind of out of step with global trends. And I think, especially recently, I think that's a good thing because like that actually does help it stand out a little more. Like,
I agree.
The actual music of J-pop is like, I think in general, you can always find really good stuff in the sort of J-pop sphere. Like, and then the industry's problem is just always promotion. That's kind of actually what it comes down to. Like K-pop, they're like, hey, you can find this on YouTube. It's been a long time since the Japanese music industry has been able to be like, oh yeah, we'll also make our music widely available on the platforms people actually use outside of Japan. And and I do think the end result with that is, I don't know, like you see it, and this maybe is a good segue into looking at the historical arc of Japanese music in the West, is like, you're seeing so much interest in older Japanese music now. Like, just as it's become more accessible on the internet, whether like officially or unofficially, I think it speaks to something Japanese pop music is really good at, which is kind of having a lasting impact. Whereas time will tell with a lot of K-pop, but I do feel K-pop always is so tied to a specific moment, and it's fantastic in that moment. But like, I think about all the K-pop I loved 10 years ago, and I'm like, oh, cool. Nobody talks about that anymore. It's like, unless you're an old nerd like me, who's like raving about Wonder Girls, you know, like nobody else is sort of drawing from that necessarily. Whereas like a group like Perfume is kind of will appear, or city pop has become a thing that is just in the DNA of so much modern music. No, that is such an interesting point. I mean, like, not to say that Japan isn't, you know, a factory churning out idol groups, et cetera, whatever pop group, but I don't know, like there's more of a, I totally get what you say. Like the maybe the turnaround time is a bit faster in what goes out from the K-pop sphere, or, you know, certain musical trends kind of last, and Japan just kind of does their own thing. So because they do their own thing, the barrier for entry might be a little bit higher for the Westerner or whatever, the outsider. But once you're in it, then you kind of know the language they're speaking. So, you know, the metaphorical language that they're speaking musically, and the trends and all that. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and I think the one good thing is the Japanese music industry is getting better about that. Like 10 years ago, it was so like hard to access any of this music. Like, and I totally get that as a barrier to entry. It's like, if you can't watch, if you can only watch like a 30-second clip of a song on YouTube that's in like really bad resolution, nobody's going to want to get in on that. But just because of the way trends in Japan have changed too, the way that younger consumers are also online first, whether it be with YouTube or subscription streaming, like J-pop is finally kind of with it. I don't even know what that means. Like they get how music is actually enjoyed by most people, and I think that is creating more avenues. So it is changing, which is nice. And I think in the next decade, you're going to see a lot of like bigger shifts as well. Definitely.
I mean, like, okay, so we can segue into the city pop thing that you mentioned, and this is one of these moments where I think I mean, I don't know in practical terms how much it ended up impacting or accelerating this move to more online being more accessible, but it at the very least seems to have been some kind of wake up call for some of the people that were paying attention in the fact that, like, yes, there's this market, there's this demand for Japanese music, not even like new Japanese music, but like old Japanese music. We can do something here.
Yeah.
This has become this whole like internet sensation. Like, actually, if we try to do this, maybe we can actually capitalize on this. But, you know, we'll see what happens. It's still, I think that was like 2017, 2018. But like, I'm still seeing the influence of that whole city pop craze, like with like, you know, young YouTubers, like people in their early 20s, like they know these old songs from like Showa era Japan. So I'm just, could you give us a little bit of insight into what this whole like city pop explosion was, and then how it was that you ended up interviewing Maria Takeuchi, who was like kind of at the epicenter of this in a way?
Definitely. Oh, where to start? Like, in terms of the city pop renaissance, if you will. I don't know if anyone ever settled on a good term for it. City pop boom.
Yeah.
I know, you know, there's always been a very online cohort of people. Like, if you go onto message boards, especially like in the early 2010s, I remember like there would be people just sharing music from the 80s from Japan, which I think even back then had a really good reputation with more sort of like music writery types. Like, before it became more spread online, people knew like, oh, do you like, oh, Hosono is really great, you should listen to his video game album or whatever. So it always has had a bit of like that sort of I don't even know what you would call it. I don't want to say nerd, just like very online, like cachet to it. And then I think a really big part of it was you then had stuff like, I don't know how much we want to go into this. Like, there was this internet micro genre called vaporwave that really leaned into sort of Japanese imagery, like kind of to a reductive degree would use like katakana and kanji as like a titling sequence to stand out. And you get like kind of ridiculous song titles from like these producers living in like England or something. And like using a lot of 80s Japanese imagery as well, and sampling a lot of Japanese city pop and older Japanese music. And that, to me, I think started introducing the idea of 80s Japan as this cool Tumblr era like aesthetic. Aesthetic is a word I think is very important, because that's what it kind of became.
Right.
You know, neon, grids, purple, Tron, but not. So like that happens, and then you get, so that music kind of starts floating in the online ecosystem. It's in the air. And then the final step is the YouTube algorithm, this mysterious thing that starts pushing music forward to people based on some confluence of likes and views and mood or whatever. And it resulted in this really weird, because it's not the actual song, this sort of weird mutation of Maria Takeuchi's 84 song Plastic Love, like going viral on YouTube. And the upload came with this black and white photo of Takeuchi that was actually from a few years earlier, not related to Plastic Love, which became a thing later on. And yeah, that image kind of became a meme. Like, I remember when was it? Was it 2017, 2018? I'm losing track of all time. Like, I remember just being on Twitter and seeing people making fan art of this Maria Takeuchi photo and being like, well, that's wild. Like, okay, sure. And that was definitely the moment, you know, it really started becoming bigger and bigger. So that led to my adventure in trying to interview her. I want to say that was, when did I start? Because I met, she's with Warner Music Japan. She's part of a sub label there. And I remember going to their office just to chat with one of the people there who I know, who I'd interviewed in the past. I want to say this was maybe May 2018, June 2018. And it was kind of bringing the idea of like, oh, I'm sure you've seen that Maria Takeuchi's like blowing up on YouTube. And yeah, they were like, yeah, what's up with that? Because this was the real first time anyone was noticing that older Japanese music had this new like existence online.
Yeah.
So I was like, hey, it'd be cool if we did an interview like with Maria Takeuchi about this. And they thought it was a good idea. So, but then, this is very common in working with especially really big Japanese artists. Maria Takeuchi is a superstar in Japan. Like, we'll get into the details later, but you have to go through a lot of hoops to set these kind of interviews up. And I get it. So like it took basically 6 months of communication with her side, her PR and manager, to sort of like lock down an interview.
Yeah.
And that was in, I want to say September or maybe early October of 2018. I went to the office. She had a room set up, and for like almost 3 hours, I was able to talk with Maria Takeuchi about everything, which is great. Yeah. So it all like, that's crazy because sometimes you try to get these interviews with artists and they'll be saying like, oh no, we don't want to deal with that. But just kind of being persistent, always checking in, sort of talking about why this would be good. Like, it all paid off in the end. It was a great interview. And I was able to write an article for the Japan Times about it. And I mean, to really like underline how big Maria Takeuchi is in Japan, like, like I've been writing about Japanese music for a long time, but this is the first thing where like lots of just like, I remember people in the Japan Times office who were maybe like in their 40s, maybe their 50s, like they hung the issue up on their cubicle wall. They were like, this is crazy. She's in our paper.
Yeah.
Like this is one of the only times that I've impressed my in-laws is like, oh yeah, I talked to Maria Takeuchi. Kind of like, oh wow, that's crazy. So like, it was really great. And she was fantastic to talk to. It was fun also. Like she was not familiar with the like why this was happening. So it was fun trying to explain to her like, well, here's this person made a remix of your song. It's called Future Funk. I can explain that if you want, but we might be here another hour. And but it was really fun, and she was like super curious about it.
Yeah. I mean, why wouldn't you be? I mean, that's such a like whole different world.
Right. And she never like none of these artists, save for like a very select handful from the 70s and 80s, none of them were ever like, oh, let's try to go global. Like this is another like Japanese music thing, is most Japanese artists, especially at that high level, are never kind of thinking like, oh, I could cross over. It's a very like, it's a rare thought in very special circumstances. So for Maria Takeuchi, it was like weird because she never intended this, and suddenly it's like, you're kind of, you like represent an entire generation of Japanese music to teens on the internet.
And like there's good reason to think that too, because there's been so many failed attempts at trying to cross over, and like I can't think of a genuinely successful, long-lasting example of someone that was successful outside of the like already interested in Japan community, right?
Right. I mean, I'm going through my memory banks now of like who even, you get stuff like Yellow Magic Orchestra had a lot of success in the 70s and 80s. But when you get into sort of the bigger artists, like I'm trying to think, like Hikaru Utada in the early 2000s, they made a very famous crossover effort into the Western market. Everybody can listen to Easy Breezy, their debut single in English. But it's not like Utada didn't really stick at the time. And I think it's just because the the nature of everything has changed so much. The way people consume music is so much more like, like something like Plastic Love can take off. Or like more recently, I think Utada has enjoyed more attention because it's easier. You know, you're not going by the way that success used to be measured in Western music markets, which is like, oh, did your album chart #1? Did you move X amount of copies of your CD? Yeah. Now it's kind of like, oh, no, I remembered the Kingdom Hearts song. I remember Simple and Clean. And now I have access to her new music and we can talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like the internet has made it possible for niches to succeed because these niche communities that are like around the world can all like converge on this, you know, one thing, right? But you can't get those same people to converge at an event in Texas, right? So, I guess you see like,
I mean, and it's the story of like all music. I mean, even K-pop, you know, you have a success story like BTS who are kind of able to achieve this, you know, the most successful Asian artist of all time. But like when you look at K-pop as a whole, it's still the same thing. It's a very like fan powered, like super powered niche community who are able to elevate it up a level, you know, like it is kind of just how maybe not just music. It's kind of how everything is now.
Yeah.
With only a few examples of things really becoming, what would people say, like, you know, monolithic culture. The monoculture is the word I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
So and I think Japan really benefits from that just because there's so much and like it thrives on sort of niche support and being able to rally those people around it.
Yeah. I could keep asking you about this, but I think we should move on to the next niche topic.
I'm here today. I'm a niche guy.
Which is Eurobeat.
Heck yeah. Let's do it.
So Eurobeat or Super Eurobeat, you know, if you go by the AVEX labeling, but is this so? Okay, so this is my explanation of Eurobeat. It's high energy dance music that became popular, particularly in the 90s in Japan. It's produced mainly by Italians, and a lot of the English lyrics that are used are utterly nonsensical, but the music is very catchy and just very like fills you with energy. And it exploded in popularity, you know, in the 90s with Initial D, but also with the whole gyaru culture and the whole nightclub post-bubble boom, right? Like that's kind of the general idea. And
it's a solid elevator introduction to it. Yeah.
Thank you. Because I love Eurobeat. So now, but I love Eurobeat, but I was very much aware, like when I got into this, it was like maybe around 2000, 2001, like this is not something you talk to your friends about unless they're already into like super deep into Japan or Initial D or something like that. And yet now it's become this thing like online, like it's become like meme culture. Like it's such a weird thing for me as someone that saw it as like such a like, you know, kind of niche thing, but it seems more in your face now. So my question is, so what inspired you to take on this deep dive into Eurobeat in present day, and what did you find along the way?
So this one was this is an example of being very fortunate because I was actually approached by a media person, a PR person, that's the word, a PR person who was working with AVEX to promote the latest edition of Super Eurobeat. So that's always the most welcome is when somebody's like, hey, do you want to interview X famous person? Like, yes, please. I don't have to.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas Maria Takeuchi was like 6 months of me being like, please, let's set this up. There's plenty of failed ones you could throw in that pile. But this was kind of the opposite where it was like, oh no, we'll set everything up. It was like, oh, perfect. So getting that message, I will say, because you get lots of PR pitches from companies being like, hey, do you want to write about X artist? And And like, there's a lot. You're just kind of like, I don't see what the bigger hook here is. I don't know if that's necessarily enough for a bigger feature. But with the Eurobeat pitch, first off, it's Eurobeat. So I was kind of like, oh, you got to do this. It's like, it's one of those. I have a real interest in the parts of Japanese culture, Japanese pop culture, I should say, that have become kind of like ignored because they're uncool. Like, city pop has become this really cool thing, but there's like lots of other music from that period where it's like, to me, is just as good, but it's been kind of relegated to the book off recycle bin of history. Good, I think it's still quite beautiful in its way. And I think for a while Eurobeat was there.
Yes,
like it was
absolutely.
kind of just a punchline.
Yeah.
I mean, you clearly like. I'm curious. When you were in Japan, did you go to any like Eurobeat events? Like, what was your experience with Eurobeat? Well, you were in Kobe and so forth.
Okay, so for the most part, my experience with Eurobeat in Japan during all of my stays has been kind of what you said. Right now, where it's been this kind of forgotten thing, brushed off to the side. I'll be completely honest with you. Like, I think I heard it the most times when I was walking around, like kind of looking for somewhere to eat, and I happened to stroll by a rather shady, red lighty kind of establishment.
That's the code.
I don't know, but like just blaring, I guess because it's very
welcome.
I guess because it's upbeat, trying to like attract people. I don't know, but the fact is that you didn't hear it. Like, it wasn't the in thing at the time, right? Now, that being said, in 2006 or 7 that was the first time I went to Japan. And I went with a friend, and we were in Tokyo for about a week, as well as Kagoshima. But while in Tokyo, we wanted to go to a Eurobeat club, right? And so, unfortunately, by that time, the place most famous among like the Eurobeat, community, Velfar, right? That Eurobeat club had already closed. But there was another one, which was kind of the successor, and that was Ageha. I'm not sure if they're still open today, but
nice. Ageha just closed, actually.
Oh really?
They closed at the end of January. Yeah, it was a big blow to the Tokyo club community. Wow. Not just Eurobeat, everything.
Wow. Okay, well, I'm glad I have this story.
Yeah, cool. Please, this is like, in memoriam. Ageha, go for it.
So I go to Ageha with my friend, and we're not like club people. Like, we're from Miami, Club City, but we don't go to clubs, right? Like, we just want to experience the Eurobeat culture, right? So we get in the elevator, the lights go pitch black, neon lights, and like lights start blaring, like music starts playing as the elevator goes down. Awesome.
Wow.
Then we get out. Wow. Yeah, we get out, and it's a bunch of people doing para. And like
the dream. You've ascended to heaven right there.
My friend and I think we started hearing Eurobeat first because we were really into Dance Dance Revolution. We're old nerds. We used to go to the arcade, and we used to play back in the day. And so you get a lot of Eurobeat sounding stuff there. And so like this, I don't know, like para was something we were familiar with, but we never did it. So to sound, we're going to sound totally lame here, but we basically just ended up sitting on the couch watching what was going on, and just kind of like, wow, okay, we're here. We did this.
That's journalism is what you were doing. Yeah. That's good.
So that's my general experience with Eurobeat in Japan. That being said, like, we did go hunting for super Eurobeat compilation albums and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, and that does hit on something that I do find so, and it really does speak to something we were talking about earlier, which is how Japan, like, beyond just having all these niches you can kind of fall into if you want, like, it doesn't necessarily change with the times. Like, certain parts of the entertainment industry, like, Eurobeat's heyday ended a long time ago initially, but like the Super Eurobeat comps were still coming throughout the 2000s and 2010s. Like you still had these events, like even after those clubs in the Roppongi closed, like, like there would be these outposts at Ageha, or like you would find small things, or like, it's funny, you were mentioning your experience with it. I remember my first real like brush with Eurobeat in Japan was like when I was still a teacher. I was working in a junior high school, and like, I don't know if anybody listening to this has ever taught in a school where you're doing like the assistant language route, and you're like, you know, that you have to kill time. Like the teacher and you will sometimes be like, all right, let's play an English song, and we'll let the students sort of absorb the language, a sponge, if they will. This surely works and is valuable. I don't know about that, but like the teacher I was working with, she liked Disney. So she was like, all right, we're going to play a song from a Disney movie. How about You'll Be in My Heart from Tarzan? But the only version she had was Disney put out their Disney Eurobeat CDs from like the 2000s. She had the Eurobeat version of I mean those are real like landmarks for Eurobeat. And like I remember her playing this for the students, and the students were bewildered. And she was trying to explain to them what Pata Pata was and like what the 90s were. And there was a bunch of like 13-year-olds being like, what? Like, it was incredible. And to me at the time, that was like 2013, maybe. Like, that was a real like, oh yeah, this is a real like, you know, this is a reference. This is the thing that in a comedy they bring out to be like, hey, remember the 90s? Pata Pata. Like, everyone has a fan. Julia, been really interesting to watch. Exactly. And like, this is the other thing that made me really want to sort of dive into the Eurobeat story is in recent years, it has become more like, I don't want to say cool because it's not. But like its influence is more apparent. Like most clearly, and DJ Boss and I, DJ Boss being a very prominent, the person who oversees the Super Eurobeat comps for AVEX, very accomplished Eurobeat DJ who I talked to for this story for the Japan Times. We talked a lot about a 2018 song, Da Pump's USA.
That song blew my mind when it came out. That just blew my mind. It's like,
I think it blew everybody's mind.
I know this song. Why is this a song now?
Why is it back? I mean, everybody thought that. I mean, DJ Boss was like, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to be a hit. And it was. It was the biggest song of 2018. Like, so that, like, in and of itself was a really interesting moment of being like, oh, okay, what's happening here? But then you kind of go a level down, and there's a lot of younger Japanese artists who kind of exist. They release a lot of their music on SoundCloud. They release a lot of their music just through YouTube. Some would classify them as quote unquote hyper pop, which is a new kind of like niche genre that is a whole nother lane to get into. But like these kids are clearly inspired by Eurobeat. They kind of, whether they grew up with it when they were little or just because they've come around to it as they kind of get into 90s culture, like there's a whole new generation of kids who are borrowing like the sonic elements of it. And you actually even hear it in non-Japanese music where it's like, you know, there's like European creators who are drawing from Eurobeat. And then, of course, and I think you could even dive into this, like Eurobeat became a meme. Like, thanks to, as this always goes, thanks to anime becoming even bigger than it was. In the past, the anime Initial D, which was like the soundtrack was like all Eurobeat when they're racing. Like, it became like there's just like YouTube comps that are like, what is it like when the Eurobeat hits or whatever? It's just like Night on Fire played over a toddler falling into a pool or something on their tricycle.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's just Eurobeats become this thing that's both like both a musical influence, but also like, it's like internet culture. It's weird.
Yeah.
But in the best way possible.
I love it. One of the first instances of me noticing this surge in Eurobeat as a meme thing was back in the day. You're the man now, dog. All right, like maybe some of the older listeners, like are familiar with this like internet meme website. But
is this what the retirement home sounds like? You and me talking about YTMND.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
I mean, do the 20-year-old, well, unless they're watching like YouTube channels about old memes, the 20-year-olds don't know about You're the Man Now, dog. But it was this like meme website, right? And one of the
best of times, series, some would say.
Yeah. I was definitely on there checking them all out. But running in the 90s, this super popular, Initial D Super Eurobeat song became like this recurring song on the website. And from there, I think running in the 90s is probably one of the most well-known ones that pops up in all these memes.
Absolutely. Oh my God, you're right. Yeah, it's just always, and of course that's the same in Japan, of course, even as Eurobeat became more, not cool, not as mainstream. Like you could go on Nico Nico Doga and like just, it's still like, whether it's ironic or otherwise, like still that music appeared everywhere.
Yeah.
Like, the internet really gave it extra life. And I guess now I still am not, in Japan, it's definitely Da Pump. Da Pump definitely kind of shined a light on what was possible with Eurobeat.
Mm-hmm.
But even beyond that, it's been interesting to hear it become more of a foundation for a lot of younger people's approach to creating electronic music.
Yeah. Like,
maybe it's all just memes. Maybe they're just like, I love meme music.
Yeah. It's gotten to this kind of escape velocity point.
That's how you get into it now.
Yeah. Well,
good way to put it.
This is my theory, and I don't think it's anything original, but the kind of like maybe 10-year period or maybe 10, 15-year period, it's like anything from about 10 to 15 years ago, it's like max uncool. But then once you get into like maybe 20 years ago, then it starts to kind of get a little bit more like the kids that grew up with it start to kind of maybe on purpose or subliminally, like start to kind of go back and experiment with it. And I think we're starting to reach that, being that we're in 2022. Eurobeat had its like explosion in the 90s. And so it seems like, and plus now with this whole internet angle, maybe like that's kind of like it's bubbling up to the surface a little bit.
Yeah, there's definitely a cycle aspect to it. Like you say, a cycle of coolness, or at least like ironic coolness. Which is definitely how Da Pump was received. I remember when that first
dasa kakkoi, they said like,
like even DJ Boss was like, do you know this term? I was like, oh yeah, we all do. We lived through it. But then it kind of just became cool.
Yeah.
So like, it's interesting, and I do think this is what Japanese music does well, is because it's not necessarily trying to sort of play on a global stage. It's not trying to compete, in the Billboard charts in America, for example. And maybe that's a bad thing. Maybe it should be. But because it's not, the music ends up taking on new forms, whether it's Eurobeat kind of like creeping back into the consciousness, or like, I think what's very notable now about Japanese music is, whereas the rest of the world's kind of gravitated away from it, like rock is still so central to Japanese music.
Yeah.
And like, I'm surprised how well Japan does rock. Like, and like, you talk about cycles, that's gonna come back. And like, I think Japan's in a good position if they are kind of like, hey, look what we've been doing with this.
Yeah. I don't hear guitars in like contemporary Western pop music. I hear guitars in Japanese pop music.
They never left. And it's funny because recently, like K-pop has started doing more with guitars in their music. Like, and it's just so weird to hear, because it's one of the rare instances to me where it's like, I kind of think Japan does this way better.
Yeah.
Like, because usually K-pop is so good at sort of adapting to sort of hip hop trends and dance trends that are kind of popular in the West. But like, yeah, there's just a bunch of songs that have come out in the past 6 months where I'm like, oh, they're just trying to be King Nu, or they're trying to be like, they're trying to like, they don't get rock. It's just, they're trying to wear it as another costume and it's not fitting them the right way.
Yeah.
So it's weird. It's really weird that Japan can take sort of these things that are totally off cool at the time and then just stick with it. And when it's back, it's like, oh, cool. There's a whole new generation of stuff to discover.
Yeah. Just a couple last quick things regarding DJ Boss, the person who you interviewed, very influential figure in, handling the Super Eurobeat.
Go for it.
So number one, I looked him up on YouTube just to see like what comes up. And I found that he was doing live streams, streaming Eurobeat. Primarily, it seems like a lot of Initial D stuff, but just Eurobeat in general, probably. And I saw one live stream that he did where he was like talking to people and spinning music as he was talking. Like it had like, I think 14,000 views. So there's a community of people like still into this, watching.
Beautiful.
And he's still popular. So that's cool. That's really cool. Now the other thing though is regarding DJ Boss, like in the article, it kind of sounded like he was a bit unhappy that Eurobeat became so associated with like ghetto culture and para in this like moment in the 90s, whereas he kind of thought of it as like something independent of that, something more than just that one moment in time. Could you kind of tell us like what was your kind of interpretation of what he was telling you? What was his thoughts on kind of this evolution of Eurobeat, like where it was, what people thought of it, and like where it is now?
I think the key to understanding DJ Boss is I think he does just genuinely love the music above all else. Like, and I think especially when you got to the end of the 90s and early 2000s in Japan, like, as we've been talking about, like, Eurobeat did become more associated with kind of like youth culture, teenage girl culture. And I think specifically what got in his craw is stuff like para dancing, there's a lot of just punchlines from that time where it's like, oh, look at these people doing para dancing. Isn't that silly?
Yep.
Like, and he was also he understands there's pluses and negatives to these things. So he wasn't outright like that sucked, but he definitely, he likes the music above all else, I feel. And I think sort of all as he put it, the culture around it, the stuff that kind of takes the place of the music. Like you don't remember the Eurobeat songs necessarily. You remember people in a club doing synchronized hand dances. Like that's the stuff that kind of made him uneasy. I will say, talking about stuff like Da Pump and like he's aware of all the Initial D memes too, which I just always find funny when people are like watching meme compilations. Like he sees the benefits now of it kind of like having that connection to things like anime or para.
Yeah.
Like, and I feel talking to him, he's more okay with it now, just because I think it's helping to, bring it back into people's minds.
Yeah.
So like, I feel when he thinks back on the 2000s, it's kind of like that was the death knell, was it becoming too associated with these other things, and that takes away from the music.
Yeah.
But now I think he sees more of the positive side of it. And I do get the sense he's more, as maybe we all do as we age, like more at peace with how it has multiple identities beyond just the music.
Yeah. Did you get any insight into the production process for a song? Like, does he like pitch ideas? Do the Italian artists mainly work on their own? Like, was that anything that you guys touched on?
Yeah. I mean, and this was it didn't end up being a huge part of the story, but personally for me, it kind of blew my mind. I did ask him how the Super Eurobeat compilations come together. And like, basically what it comes down to is DJ Boss and I guess his team, they'll first get reference tracks of what's kind of popular in Japan. And this is where it kind of starts boggling my mind. So for this edition, it was kind of like, It's all the current wave of popular like rock-based J-pop. So it's groups like YOASOBI, Ado, who else? It's all this kind of like, it's kind of like rock that has a sad edge to it. It's very gloomy. Like the lyrics are extremely gloomy. The melodies are upbeat, but the content's very gloomy or angry. So like, first off, it's funny imagining that in Europe, personally. And then it's stuff like he was also saying like, yeah, like BTS is also popular here. So we're like, hey, can you make it sound like BTS?
It's so weird.
And I'm just like, what? And then, so basically they put the reference tracks together to sort of give them a sense of what's connecting with people in Japan. And then, yeah, the Italian side just does whatever. Like, it sounds so hands off.
Yeah.
Like, they say, oh, here's a couple ideas for you.
Yeah.
And you can sometimes hear those ideas coming through.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, there's one song on the Eurobeat comp. I'm blanking on the name again, but it's like, it sounds like Billie Eilish. It has the same bass line as Bad Guy, at least for a little bit. It's just like, oh, okay. I see now. But yeah, the Italians just make Eurobeat and send it over. And then I think there's some more back and forth trying to like polish it, but it's not as control. It's pretty loose. It sounded like, and then, yeah, it all comes together.
Yeah. I mean, if you would have told me, Tony, guess how they produce Eurobeat? I would have said something like that, because some of the songs that they produce are like just utterly wacky or just so of the moment. Like this is probably like a 90s song, but there's one song called Ganguro, right? And it just sounds like some guy, maybe DJ Boss, said, look, there's this thing going on in Japan where girls kind of, they tan their faces and their skin. They're called Ganguro and they go to Shibuya. Write a song about that. Make it super upbeat. And then this Italian guy, Italian guy that really doesn't know that much about Japan, just kind of like wings it. And the lyrics and the things that they're saying are like just amazing, just hilarious, and just oftentimes they don't make sense. And to me, like that's part of the magic of Eurobeat. Like, you can listen to like an instrumental and it'll get you pumped. But the things that they are saying in totally like understandable English, the way that they're saying it, the stories that they are telling, the topics that they pick to sing about are just things that I would never get in Western pop music. And every new album was always this wonderful experience of discovery. It's like, what the heck is Dave Rogers going to sing about next? You know, it's like...
I will say, if I had had more time on that story, and then maybe this is a good follow-up at some point, I would love to, go to the Italian side and get a sense of how these songs come together. Because, I feel like the Japanese side, it's very kind of just overseeing everything and trying to shape it and keeping the culture alive and knowing the market. But I would love to like talk to whoever is like everyone involved in this. Like, how do you keep doing this? Because it's great. Don't stop.
Yeah.
That's a dream.
Like, you know, a lot of these guys are probably like 60 years old, but they're still producing, you know, Fire, 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 Baby, and driving around in the car, gasoline, and all this stuff. And just the life, man. That's the life. If you can make a living off like, oh my God, I'm envious.
Right.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. All right. So, okay, just last question. I know we've gone long. I can't help it. I love Eurobeat, so I'm sorry.
No worries. This is a blast. Love talking that Eurobeat, that gas.
Yeah. So, last thing for anybody that just, okay, I don't, enough Eurobeat already. Any recent, like,
stop
kind of
it, maybe
stop it. Yeah. Enough already. Any like recommendations, any artists that you really like that are, you know, more recent, anybody that you've discovered lately, anything you can recommend for the listeners within the realm of Japanese music?
I mean, there's always a ton, and 2022 has been really good so far. Like, highly recommend. I could go on and on. A few just off the top of my head that recently have been like, you know, taking up brain space. I feel a lot of people have talked about it, but Hikaru Utada's new album from this year, Bad Mode, is probably the best album anywhere so far in 2022. Highly recommend that.
Awesome. Okay.
To get, I guess, slightly more obscure, Let's
Mhm.
see, that's not a J-pop defining artist. The dance producer Soichi Terada released a fantastic album, Asakusa Light, earlier this year. You can get that on Bandcamp. Highly recommend
Okay.
that.
Cool.
Who else? I'm running down my I can send you this link. I have a Spotify list where I just throw songs
Awesome.
to
Sure.
be
I'd love to share
yeah.
that. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm trying to see what more recently. Oh, you know who's really good? We've been talking about artists who kind of channel Eurobeat.
Yeah.
So a few that come to mind for me, and maybe it's not for everybody because they can also get quite aggressive in their sound.
Yeah.
There's a rap group here called Star Kids who do a lot of Eurobeat related things in their music.
Oh,
but
I'm curious.
It's Eurobeat is fueled by Strong Zero. So
okay.
it's great. An artist, probably my favorite artist in Japan right now, young artist, is an artist named Asaki. It's spelled 4S4KI.
Okay.
And she's just doing really fantastic work, blending a lot of genres together. Really, really good stuff. Highly recommend it. I'll send a link to this playlist. And anyone out there wants to subscribe to a newsletter where I blab about new Japanese music every week, hey, there's probably a link somewhere there if I don't forget to send it.
Definitely. Yeah. So what's the name of, I know it was a blog, but now you've kind of focused more on a newsletter, right? Is that?
Yeah. I shifted it to, newsletter style. The blog was called Make Believe Melodies. I started that in 2009 as a way to entertain myself in the countryside. And it was just a great way of sharing interesting music from Japan. And it's recently shifted, as so many media platforms have, to a newsletter format, which it's kind of fun. And it's nice to have a weekly thing rather than I used to do it. It was I got to do 2 or 3 posts a day. And that's not sustainable whatsoever. Now it is at mbmelodies.substack.com. Free for all to subscribe. No paywalls here.
Awesome.
And you can expect usually 2 things a week, usually a roundup and maybe an essay if I have time and I'm not slacking on deadlines. Or I am slacking on deadlines and choose to write the essay instead of turning in things for my editor.
Sure.
It's a coin flip, which...
Well, happy to get the information out. Of course, I will let people know about that, and the links for all that, including your Twitter, will be in the show notes. So you can just click on that and go, subscribe and do all that. But Patrick, thank you so much. There's not a lot of people I can nerd out with on Eurobeat in this way. So I was very happy, but also just Japanese music in general.
Anytime you gotta scratch the Eurobeat itch, I'm here. Call me up. We'll talk about. We didn't even get into Dance Dance Revolution and stuff.
Oh my god! My god!
Call me up when you gotta get it out.
Well, okay, maybe part 2 then.
Yeah, this is a blast. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Again, reminder: Make Believe Melodies is the name of the former Blog Now newsletter, but you can go over to mbmelodies.substack.com. Link in the show notes, and of course, I'm also going to include a link to the Eurobeat article by Patrick. So Patrick, thank you. I had a blast talking to you about Eurobeat and music in general. But if you have any questions or comments, send them over to mail@japanstationpodcast.com. And please, if you're not subscribed to the show already, please take a moment to hit that follow button or the subscribe button, whatever it is in your podcast app. I'm going to let you guys in on a little bit of a secret. I mean, it's not a secret, but I think it's the vice president of public relations or something at Libsyn said this in his podcast. By the way, Libsyn, I think, is the biggest podcast hosting service in the world, and that's what I use. But he said that Apple Podcasts does not boost rankings based on ratings and reviews. It completely goes on the amount of people subscribing to a show. So ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts are wonderful. they're really, really good because they just look nice, right? It's good to have a lot of people rating and reviewing, and I absolutely just totally appreciate that. But the most important thing you can do is to subscribe to the show. If you like what I'm doing and what I've been doing for 89 episodes now, for a couple years now, more than a couple years, then please subscribe to the show or hit that follow button on Apple Podcasts or whatever it is in your podcast app. That is going to help immensely. It doesn't cost you anything extra, and you're going to keep getting the show delivered in your podcast app, so you're not going to miss any future episodes. So please, 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 and thank you. Also, if you enjoy Twitter stuff, you can go follow me on Twitter at Japankyo News and Facebook at Japankyo News. I'm there. I'm posting stuff mostly on Twitter, but I do post links on Facebook as well. So that does it for this episode. Thank you so much to Me for providing the opening and closing song. If you haven't already, check out the latest episode of Ichimon Japan. In that one, we talk about how to say trombone in Japanese, katakana words, and actually the real focus of the episode is this supposed katakana ban that happened during World War II. Japan kind of wanted to get rid of foreign origin words, specifically like Western origin words. And so they kind of, but not really, banned katakana words. And that resulted in a whole bunch of wacky Japanese words for things that used to be in katakana, like English origin type words. So go listen to that. It's a pretty funny episode, but I think there's a lot of interesting like language information there. So again, Ichimon Japan, link in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, go find your miniature pony.
Just do it!